Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 47. My guest in this episode is Terry Tucker, and I'll introduce Terry as what I would consider to be a Renaissance person, and you will discover more about that during the interview. But I can say that Terry was an athlete in high school and college, played basketball in college, went on to be a business management person for a number of years, went into the police force, worked with hostage negotiation, and now is a published author. And that's what brings us to this conversation as we discuss his book, Sustainable Excellence. And I don't want to spoil anything in this introduction, but Sustainable Excellence is a guidebook for life. And I look forward to you discovering this conversation as well as the book. I will have links in the description field. So thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, and I hope there are things of benefit to you that you can take away from this conversation. I'm confident that that's the case, but I will hope that for you. And thank you again for joining us. And please enjoy this conversation. And I'd like to welcome Terry Tucker to the IdeaCast interview series. Really glad to have you on board. You and I, disclosure to the audience, and welcome to the YouTube audience. Glad to have you guys on board. Thank you so much for being here. It's going to be a very interesting and inspiring conversation. But in having read Terry's book, we then had a conversation, a pre-meet, and we had a beautiful conversation then, and this should be analogous to that conversation. So Terry, lest I ramble on more, welcome.
Well, thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me on them.
I'm glad to have you on. I think yours is an inspiring story. Your book is inspiring, and I want to maybe come out of the gates just talking about the book, and then we'll see where the conversation goes from there. And so your book is entitled Sustainable Excellence, and I want to ask you about the title, but I found the book to be a wonderful. So I'll say this to the YouTube audience: if you didn't have a good father figure in your life, or you feel like something's missing from your adolescence or something, and you want a little bit of an anchor, of a sort of a paternal paternal anchor, this book is great because it really doles out some life wisdom, some lived wisdom, and I appreciate that about your book, Terry. There's 10 chapters. Each one of them has a very profound title. And I know the provenance story of what led you to write this book. So I want to get into that too. So I guess if we could, let's start with the title, Sustainable Excellence. I think that's intriguing. So if you could, let us know where that title came from.
I have no idea.
Well, it works.
Yeah, I mean, I get that a lot where people will be like, excellence. Well, what is that? And in all honesty, and I don't mean to be flippant about it, it is, I don't know. I always look at kind of excellence kind of like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. You and I may look at a team or an organization and say, hey, they are excellent. And somebody else may look at them and say, yeah, I think they're good, but I don't think they're excellent. So I think excellence, sort of like beauty, it really is in the eye of the beholder. Mm-hmm. And I've always wanted to spend, and I have, I think, spent my life in pursuit of excellence, in pursuit of greatness. And I talk about it in the opening about how Vince Lombardi, when he took over with the Green Bay Packers professional football team, they were abysmal. They were horrible. And I think they were like 1-15 or something like that. And he walks in and he basically says, gentlemen, we are going to relentlessly pursue perfection, knowing full well that we will not obtain it, but along the way, we will catch excellence. And I get goosebumps just saying that. I can imagine sitting in that locker room, hear these guys that are just horrible, and then turn around and win Super Bowls and things like that. So that's the excellence part of it, wanting to be the best. And then, so many people, and I've seen this in my life, get to that point where they're excellent, and what do? They put their feet up on the desk, they sort of kick back, pour themselves a drink, and be like, I'm good. I've arrived. I've made it to the top of the mountain. And then 6 months later or a year later, boom, somebody passes them up, and they're like, wait a minute, what happened?
Mhm.
What happened is you didn't sustain it. You didn't innovate. You didn't find different ways to do things. You didn't continue to improve. And so sustainable excellence just seemed to be a good title for the book.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think every person that picks up a copy of the book and reads it should use their own interpretation of what excellence means and what the sustainability of that excellence is, and what the ecosystem of employment and discipline and all these things. By employment, I mean engaging with your pursuit of excellence. So yeah, absolutely. And but prior to our coming on for this conversation, I was trying to do my own definition of sustainable excellence, and it's basically what you just said. It's like, don't rest on your laurels. You know, find the next challenge, find the next opportunity, or life will present you with an opportunity or a challenge to keep that trophy of excellence in your hands rather than having somebody snatch it out of your hands. So absolutely, yeah, it should be up to the person to define what excellence is. And so you, in your biography, your history of your life, have had ups and downs, and you've had success, and you've had opportunities. And so I would maybe at this time ask for, in the story, in the book, it evolves, your narrative evolves, and I found some aspects of that fascinating, about sort of the career fields that you found yourself in, and having the audacity and the courage to change things midstream. And so let's talk about sustaining excellence at Terry's level, and that's perfect for Terry, and examine your early career, having come out of school. We can talk about your basketball career too, but maybe just we'll go like getting out of school and going in and working in the corporate field, and then where you went from there. I think that's a neat story.
Sure. So yeah, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, and kind of a funny story. And I've never said this before. I never knew that until after my father died. It was
Wow.
one of those things where my dad went to college. I knew where he went to college, and he certainly spent most of I have two brothers, most of our lives telling us, about college. But it wasn't until afterwards that one of us was like, "Hey, let's get a transcript from dad, see what kind of a student he was and stuff like that, and get a copy of his diploma," because we never saw a diploma. And when we wrote to the school, it was a small school in Minnesota called St. Mary's. They were like, he didn't graduate.
Oh.
And the funny thing about it was, he was one class away from
Oh.
graduating.
Oh.
And so it was like, really, we kind of had this facade, and after he passed away and stuff like that. So it was definitely something that was interesting. So anyway, so I was the first person in my family to graduate, and when I did, I was all set to make my mark on the world with my newly obtained business administration degree. And, I look back now and realize how little I knew about business just because I had a 4-year degree.
Right.
Fortunately, I was able to find that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International in their marketing department. Unfortunately, ended up living with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mom care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. So started out, in corporate America with Wendy's. And I did that because my dad was sick. And when I graduated from college, I had a decision to make. I wanted to be in law enforcement. I felt my passion was to be in law enforcement. But my dad's dad was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954, and was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad always remembered the stories my grandmother told of that knock on the door. And my dad was an infant at the time, of, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us. Your husband's been shot. And let's be honest, trauma medicine in 1933 was a whole lot different than trauma medicine in 2022.
Right. They had saws.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, yeah, we don't like it. Let's just cut it off. And so, it was just one of those things where I had a decision to make. I wanted to go that route. My dad was like, absolutely not. You're going to get out of, you're going to go to college. You're going to major in business, get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. but that's the passion that my dad wanted. That's what my dad wanted for me. And it wasn't because he was being mean. It was because he loved me. He's like, I want something better for my kids and stuff like that. But better for me was not necessarily a suit and tie kind of thing. But I spent a long time, my first two jobs, if you look at them, were in corporate America, Wendy's, and then I went to hospital administration, and then I became a 37-year-old rookie police officer, which by most intents and purposes is pretty old to be getting in that line of work.
Oh yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, most guys are right out of the military or in the early to mid 20s, and so yeah, you stood out. I'm sure.
I did.
I'm sure. But in your book, you have some interesting stories, and I think you ended up in negotiations in hostage situations and other extreme events. And but I love the stories that you tell, the anecdotes about having worked more on the streets and working with street wisdom, if you will, nefarious as it might be, but just trying to the fact that you came down to a sort of a bicycle permit or something like that, a light permit for bicycles for guys that were sentinels for narcotics dealers and things. That's creative, out of the box thinking, but nonetheless, it's fair, right? I mean, it's, what are you going to do? And so, but anyway, I'm on a tangent. The fact that you entered into law enforcement despite the history and despite your father's concerns, I think it was noble, because I feel like you were feeling called to that, to be in service and to serve the community. And so that's laudable. That's something that you should feel proud of, that you were able to do that. So talk a little bit about the negotiation, though, because I think given the nature of the book, I think learning that craft and learning to be in that pressure cooker situation obviously taught you some interesting things. So could you share that with us?
Sure. So again, I guess going back to the title, wanting to be excellent, it's the excellence portion of it. Usually on most police departments, the SWAT team, Special Weapons and Tactics, they're usually the best officers. They usually have the best training, the best equipment, and things like that. So I wanted to be part of that. I mean, when you want to be part of the best, that was the best in law enforcement. And this was in Cincinnati, Ohio, so a fairly decent sized city. And so when there was an opening for the hostage negotiating team, I put in for it. And I guess to back up, for those of your audience that don't understand how SWAT is sort of laid out, there are two types of people. There are the tactical folks, and then there are the negotiators. And the tactical guys and girls, women, are the people who have the guns and the toys and all that kind of stuff. And the negotiators are the ones who hopefully are good enough in our jobs that they don't have to use any of those toys. And so when there was an opening, I put in for it. I had to go through the whole situation with, you had to do a physical fitness test. You had to be interviewed by the psychologist. You had to take tests, the powers that be, talk to your bosses and things like that. Would this person make a good fit? Because it was a team. And for those of you who saw I think it was somewhere in the 1990s, the Negotiator movie with Samuel L. Jackson, who is basically a Superman who does everything. And people always ask me, is that the way it is? No. That's absolutely not the way it is. We do this as a team. We do this. Yes, there is one primary negotiator that's talking to the individual. There's also another negotiator sitting right next to him or her and passing them notes. Okay. And then there are other groups, 3 or 4 people, 5 people maybe, out sort of working the crowd. Why are we here? How did we get to this point? What's going on? So as a negotiator, you may be talking to somebody and you'll get a note that'll say, don't talk about his mother, because maybe this started because he had an argument with his mother. So it's definitely a team effort. And people a lot of times will be like, great job, you talked this person out. What we really did was listen the person out. And active listening was a huge part. I'll never forget my very first training. It was a very simple thing. I had a hostage taker with a hostage behind a locked door. And here I am. I don't know anything. They just kind of threw me to the lions. Here you go. Good luck. Hope this works out for you. And I'm talking to the person. And again, this is just training. This was not real. And the hostage is screaming, help me, help me, help. And I spent almost the entire time talking to the hostage, and then in the debrief, it was like, why did you do that? Well, because she was the one who was doing all the talking, but it was really, it's like, no, you have to not ignore to the point where you totally forget about, but your emphasis is on dealing with the hostage taker. And so that was a huge lesson for me. I'm trying to help. I'm trying to make a difference. Well, you got to get the person out. But to do that, you've got to negotiate with that. So it was a tremendous learning curve. We worked with a psychologist. We would train by just doing different scenarios and then debrief. What'd you think about that? Have you thought about this? Maybe this person had this mental illness, or they were off their whatever it was. So when the time came to do it, it was almost like the practice was harder than the actual negotiation itself.
Yeah, sort of mental rehearsals, and I think you mentioned that. I watched a couple of your podcast interviews with other people, and you had referenced a coach of yours that had done that, and just having students or team players on the bench using their imagination to see free throw shots going in the hoop. And so this is kind of the same firing and wiring system, I suppose. So just for Pulp, did you have any interesting negotiation stories for those that like adventure and action out there? Was there any one particular case that would warrant like an episode on one? I don't watch TV, but like one of these police shows or something? Or was it very mundane and things that would not make Samuel Jackson show up?
No, there were always some good ones. I'll give you two real quick ones. First one's kind of a funny one. Usually when you start negotiating with an individual, it's like any relationship. You need to develop trust with that person, and they need to trust you. So at the very beginning, you don't say, hey, put the gun down and come out or anything like that. You have to develop that rapport with the individual. But this was an individual who was drunk, and he had taken his wife hostage in his house, and he had a gun. And I happened to be working in uniform that night, and so I got to the scene fairly early. And I was talking to the uniform guys in the district. I'm like, what's the deal? He's drunk, barricaded himself, got a gun with his wife. Okay, do you have him on the phone? Yes, we do. So I started talking to him. And I just had a feeling after about 10 or 15 minutes, I said to him, what would it take for you to come out? And he got real quiet for a minute. And he's like, give me a beer. And I'm like, wait a minute. If I gave you a beer, do I have your word that you would come out? He said, do I have your word I could drink it?
There's a detail there.
So I said, sure, absolutely. So he was of legal age, so I wasn't doing anything illegal. So I gave one of the officers $5 to get down to the store, buy a beer. The tactical team put it on the front porch. I called them back and said, your beer's on the front porch, but you don't get it until your wife comes out. You come out with your hands up. He's like, do I still have your word that I can drink it? I said, you absolutely have my word. All of a sudden, the front door flies open. Here comes his wife, with her hands up. And then here he comes with his hands up. We handcuff him, let him drink his beer, and off to jail he goes. So
that's so American.
It totally is. And it's so atypical. That is totally not the way they happen. This one is a little more serious, but it actually happened this way. This individual wanted to take his own life. And so it's probably 8:00 at night. He slit his wrists. Well, that didn't work. And so somehow he got the idea that turning the gas on his oven and sticking his head in the oven was a good idea. Well, that didn't work either for him.
Works in the cartoons, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So he ends up calling one of his relatives, and his relative ended up calling the police. Now he's got a gun. And it's probably 3:00 in the morning now when this is going on, and I'm negotiating with him. And I think he was just exhausted. He'd been through all this emotion, all this drama. And he said to me, I'd really like to come out. And I said, well, why don't you do that? I said, look, just put the gun down, bring the phone with you. I said, when you come out, we'll talk. I'll come down to the scene and we'll talk face to face. He's like, I'd really like that. I said, but don't hang up the phone. Just bring the phone with you. Well, what's he do? He hangs up the phone, which we don't think is really that big of a deal because we're conditioned that when a conversation's over, we hang up the phone. But probably 30 seconds later, one of the tactical officers comes on the radio and says, we heard a gunshot. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. You didn't. He didn't. Shot himself in the head. But he shot himself at an angle where the bullet went underneath his skin at his temple here, around his skull, and out the other side. Never penetrated his skull, never got to his brain. So here's a guy 3 times tries to kill himself. And I think that's God's way of saying, nope, don't want you up here right now. Yeah. He ended up going to the hospital, obviously, but he certainly wasn't having, I wouldn't have bought a lottery ticket with him or anything like that.
Well, maybe you should, because the fact that the bullet went, it navigated around.
It did.
Wow. I mean, we think a chunk of lead with 300 foot-pounds of energy, it doesn't skirt. It reminds me of, I watched a documentary once, and there was this crusty old World War II veteran. He goes, yeah, I was captured by the Japanese, and they took one of their 7.68 rifles, or, they had a strange caliber in their long guns. And he goes, they hit me right in the head with that thing, and it bounced right off my thick Irish skull. But can you imagine the soldier that tried to blow his head off? It just went,
right.
It was an angle shot. I think it went up over on his forehead, but the fact that it didn't just explode his head, and the fact anyway, I like ballistics, so that just blows my mind. That
we couldn't believe it. Was like, seriously, I mean, obviously it was a head wound, so there was a lot of blood to begin with. Yeah. But I mean, by the time they finally got him to the hospital, and I don't know, I wasn't at the scene, but as I recall, I don't think he even lost consciousness. So I mean,
bless his
heart. A lot of blood, but a lot of show.
Yeah.
No go.
And what I was thinking about while you were telling the story is he slit his wrist. So how would you handcuff somebody with lacerated wrists? I mean, how do you immobilize?
You handcuff them the way you normally would, and then when you finish, you disinfect
clean
your handcuffs.
Right. I'm just wondering how it wouldn't agitate his injury even more, so that you have a potential liability on your hands if the guy keels over. Obviously he shot himself, and that's not where the story went, but I was thinking that, like, oh shoot, you got a guy with bloody wrists. How do you?
And he, obviously at this point in time, he wasn't much of a threat anymore. He wasn't agitated. He wasn't trying to get away from us. It was just like, okay, we were very lucky. We had two medical doctors from the University of Cincinnati emergency room that the head of the ER allowed to go through SWAT training, and they would show up on every call up with us. Mm-hmm. And they had these huge duffel bags. I mean, they basically could have done open heart surgery or brain surgery right there on scene if they needed to. So that, from our perspective, always made you feel good, if something happened. But I mean, they took care of him, and I don't remember if they, bandaged his wrist before they cuffed him and stuff. So took him off to the hospital.
Yeah, I think about these weird things.
No, that's it.
Oh my goodness, that's a good story in a morbid kind of Irish,
it is
kind of gallows humor kind of way. And hopefully he, that bullet knocked some sense into him, and if he can still hear in that one ear, hopefully he's moving on with his life and doing better. We'll hope that.
You're right, and that's one thing when we negotiated. We never lied to people because, when people would say to us, hey, I'll come out, I'll put the gun down, but you got to promise me I'm not going to go to jail. And we would have to say, well, when you come out, you are going to go to jail. And then we would try to deflect the conversation to something that was more positive. But there was always the opportunity. And it certainly happened. I was a negotiator for about 4 years, where we would negotiate with somebody 2 years from now, and if they thought you lied to them, now that whole trust situation is gone. You're going to have to bring in another negotiator to be the primary. So that's one big reason we never lied to people.
Yeah, it's a relatively small town. If you get a bad reputation, like, oh, don't trust those guys. Yeah, just go ahead and cap the hostage and go, get out of there.
Right.
Yeah, which doesn't get better after that.
No.
So I have to imagine, having been a negotiator, that once you're removed from that profession or that set of disciplines and skills, that do you find yourself to this day in public, in scenarios and lines and places and stuff like that, and you see conflict arise, and then so part of your brain is like sort of taking the situation into account and does that, in other words, does that old negotiator and you still come out sometimes and you're like,
it does. And kind of a funny story. Last week I was in treatment for my cancer, and I have a nurse who was taking care of me, who was a former minister before she became a nurse. And I forget what we were talking about, but one of the things we used to do is ask what and how questions. So, what that does is, obviously it's my job to try to get you out safely, but by asking you what and how questions as the hostage taker or the barricaded person, now I've engaged you in trying to figure out a solution to this. And you don't even realize that I've done that by asking you these questions. And she asked me a what question. And I immediately went in, and her name was Jennifer. And I'm like, Jen, are you trying to negotiate with me? It just hit me in such a way that, oh, that would have been a question I would have asked if I was negotiating with somebody. So yeah, what and how questions, getting people to open up and talk and bleed off a lot of that emotional energy so that they could now start thinking with their rational brain, because we all make better decisions with our rational brain than we do our emotional brain.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. So a de-escalation of that peak emotional excitation.
Exactly.
I don't know if I could do that. I'd have to think about that. I enjoy people and talking to people. And there's been occasions in my life where, like car accidents where, I'm a witness to something that happened and I immediately go to the person who was injured or did not cause the accident, check in on them. And sometimes they're irate. And I try to just quickly say, okay, it's already happened. They made a mistake. I'll give you what I saw and you just work it out. And the insurance is here for a reason and yada, yada. But if you can just kind of catch folks when they're peaked and then just, point a couple of rational things out. That's the only experience I've ever had with that is a couple occasions. In fact, it just happened recently. Some guy got rear-ended by a huge delivery truck on the highway. And I was like, are you all right, man? And he's like, yeah, but his brand new truck just got totaled. And I'm like, yeah, so sorry, dude. I couldn't do anything for him, but I just said, well, it's a commercial vehicle. You're in good hands. And so, it's
right. Hopefully you got good insurance. And
yeah,
it's definitely that's the hard part about negotiating, is the emotion part of it. And I would say we were pretty good at what we did as a team. We trained with the FBI's hostage negotiation team. We trained with LAPD, SWAT, and things like that. So we had some really good training. But I'd say 90% of the time we were successful in we never lost a hostage. But there was about 10% of the time where, say we got a tip that a homicide suspect was in a particular apartment. We'd surrounded the apartment. They knew they had nowhere to go. It was just a matter of time before they were going to come out. Well, they had another option, and that was to take their own life. And so that happened. It happened enough times that I'm not going to say it bothered me. I mean, anytime there's a loss of life, somebody somewhere, I don't care if you're a homicide, you committed murder, somebody loves you. You've got a parent or a spouse or a kid or whatever. And, you'd get to that point where it was always tragic. But again, I always used to look at it like, one, I had great training. Two, I did the very best I could to get you out safely. And three, it was basically up to you how this was going to end. I could do all my little fancy tools and pull everything out of my hat, but at the end of the day, you were like, look, I'm not going back to jail, or I'm not going back to prison for the rest of my life, and I'm going to take this way out. And like I said, it was always tragic, but I don't mean to sound callous. I never lost any sleep over it, because I knew I did the very best I could to try to end it peacefully.
Yeah, and that goes with perfectionism. I think if you wanted 100%, that you would just end up frustrating yourself. Even in these type of unique situations where there is a loss of life, you do the best you can. I was a firefighter for a few years, and we had instances where people were grievously injured or more damage of property. And when it came to injury, it was automobiles, and the medic people would do the best they could. But yeah, people are going to die. People are going to have horrific things happen to them. But property damage, I always put that on a scale with firefighting, is you could go in, and there were times where we just absolutely destroyed a home or a condo because there was a structure fire. There were condos, stacks. And so we might as well destroy this unit to save other units. And, but we'd try to be conscientious of that and not, just go crazy and do the worst that we could to put the fire out. You try to think of the person's life and the upending that's already going on. So
you do. And that same kind of thought process works as a police officer if you're smart, if you're good at it, because, I may pull you over in a car, and to you, it's the scariest thing that's happened to you all year. Yeah. To me, it's the third traffic stop of the night. So, you've got to remember that people they don't like the police. They don't, it's never a good thing when the police are, at least when fire's around, it's like, yeah, the good guys are here,
Yeah.
they're going to save the day.
Yeah.
But with us, it was, you had to remember that this person, in a lot of cases, is scared to death, even though you're not going to do anything to them. They don't know that. And so you always kind of have to remember, again, kind of going back to what we talked about before, there's always somebody, they're a human being, with all their frailties and fears and insecurities. And you have to remember that. I mean, obviously you have to do what you have to do. It's your job to enforce the law, and you have to be safe, and you want to go home and things like that. But, at the end of the day, they're still a human being. You have to try to mitigate their fears a little bit.
For sure. Absolutely. And that's the sign, I think, of a wise law enforcement person is to be empathetic to a degree. You have to have your barriers, your boundaries, and things like that. And I say that partly because when I was a firefighter for a few years, I was very close with the law enforcement in that community. We'd hang out together and tell, bad jokes together and stuff like that. But there was this bond that was formed, especially at Rex. Once everything was sort of, bodies were taken away and things, like, you just stood around and talked and commiserated and stuff. And I can remember one instance. No, I'll skip that story. It's kind of gross. I don't want to tell the story. But anyway, so I think to change directions for a moment, I mentioned the provenance story of the book, that a couple of younger folks motivated you to write the book. I think you had someone you had coached who you were having dinner with, I believe, and you were having a conversation with. And you gave them some advice, and then there was somebody who reached out to you, I think through social media, who had just gotten out of college, and they were asking you some questions. So before we go into the provenance story, no, actually, let's go into the provenance story, and then I'll have a question for you after that. So these two instances are what led to the production of the book, or the writing of the book?
Correct. Yeah. One was with a former player that I had coached in high school, who had moved to, my wife and I live in Colorado now, who had moved to where we are. And the four of us, she was with her fiance, four of us had dinner one night. And I remember after dinner saying to her, I'm really excited that you're living close and I can watch you find and live your purpose. And she got really quiet for a while. And then she kind of looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, using your unique gifts and talents, and living that reason. So that was really one conversation. And then I had another conversation, as you mentioned, with a young man who had just graduated from college and had reached out to me on social media asking what I thought were the most important things that he should learn, not to just be successful in his job or in business, but to be successful in life overall. And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others. Right. Not that those aren't important. Those are incredibly important. But I wanted to see if maybe I could go a little bit deeper with him. So I took some time and I wrote some notes, and I kept, I carried a tablet with me, and I was just writing stuff down. And eventually I kind of had these 10 ideas, these 10 thoughts, these 10 principles, and then I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I've got a life story that fits underneath that principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So I've been battling cancer for the last 10 years, and I had my leg amputated in 2020. And while I was healing from that process, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories. And you've read the book. They're real stories about real people, some of them about me, some of them about other people that I knew or had read about. And that's kind of how sustainable excellence, the 10 principles to leading your uncommon and extraordinary life, came to be.
And while we're at it, there's a description link down below to access Terry's work, his book. So I'm going to be corny here and just do a quick segue.
No, that was good.
Well, I don't mind doing that because I do have some shame, but no, I really do want to advocate the book. And so my asking you the provenance story would lead me to the next question, which is, have you gotten feedback from folks of, say, under 25 who are just taking their first steps into the adult world and finding their way? Are you getting response from that demo, from that age group?
I actually am, and it's fun for me as an author. I mean, obviously, I've never written a book before. I've never had a book published. So this is still all kind of new for me. But I think, as you mentioned earlier, each principle has a chapter in the book. And there always seems to be one of those chapters, one of those principles that resonates specifically with the reader, not that the rest of them don't. And they're not in any order. Number 1 isn't any more important than number 7 or anything like that. And even for me, I wrote all 10 of them, but there's one that kind of sticks in my mind. And I think it's because I've done it. And I'm not proud that I've done it, but I've been down that road probably more times than I care to imagine. So it's always fun for me as the author when somebody will reach out and say, hey, number 5 was the one and number 7 or whatever it is. And it's a great starting point to talk about the book. How did this impact you? Why do you think it had that kind of an impact on you? What have you learned from it? How are you applying it? And things like that. So it's just so much fun for me as an author when people do reach out and want to talk about either the whole book itself or one of the chapters that really touched them.
That has to be satisfying to give birth to a book, send it out into the world to live its own life, and hear back from the people that have met your book and interacted with your book as its own little agent, its own little being. And and see how, and especially a book like yours. Your book isn't a crime novel. It's not any kind of how-to book per se, not like a, how to fix a 454 Chevy big block or something, add a few more horsepower to it or what. No, it's more fine-tuning the human experience and seeing wisdom, stoicism, resilience, all these things that can be brought to light or to salience for anybody that's willing just to take a few minutes. And I think the best stories, there's so many gurus out there, there's so many people that we look up to, but I think the everyday man like yourself who tells a story, there's a balance of like you said, personal life experience woven into a book, and there's other people that you've met and known. I find that very fulfilling and intriguing, that we are these just everyday people, but when we come across each other and we tell these stories, they're relatable, they're down to earth, but they're nonetheless profound and impactful, equal to that of someone, say for the big, the big folks, but like God and Jesus and Buddha and all these other people, but like the guru types that have gone out and sold a lot of books and gave all this great information and advice, and they kind of get put on this pedestal, and it almost becomes unreal in a sense. Are they really, I don't know. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent, but just the fact that an everyday person can tell a great story and impart some wisdom and some food for thought to people, I think is laudable. I think it's really commendable that you undertook this book and made that endeavor. I want to talk about health and what your body's dealing with right now. But before we go into that, I also want to spend some time with your early years, your basketball, and being a team player, and how teamwork, much like the hostage negotiations or police SWAT training, taught you to be an unusual team player. How did basketball shape you to bring you where you are now?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I had, great parents. I am the oldest of 3 boys. You can't tell this from my voice or from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall, and I played eventually college basketball at the Citadel, which is a Division I school in South Carolina. I've got a brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame. Another brother who was 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So I sort of joked that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was, going on. It's like, down in front, kind of thing. And,
you guys sit in the back. Tucker's in the back.
Exactly. And we did. And we always wanted to do that. But my mom was like, no, we need to sit right in front. I'm like, Mom, you're killing me. Nobody else could see the priest, And then, but our 5'8" mother really was the boss of all of us. She was always running to the store and getting us food and milk and all that kind of stuff. And so sports was really a big part. My brothers and I played football, not soccer. It was actually football, baseball, and basketball growing up. I ran track kind of in the off season to stay in shape and things like that. But I started out, we were living, I pretty much grew up in Chicago, but we were living in Columbus, Ohio at the time. And I just happened to get on a rec league team. I don't know, I was 9 years old maybe or something like that, with the son of the assistant coach at Ohio State University. And I will never forget this, walking in, and we played in this little public school gym that doubled as a lunchroom and an auditorium. And I mean, it literally was a multi-purpose room. And I remember walking in behind Mr. Burkholder, who was the assistant coach, and he was on a recruiting. He had a kid in, and this guy's name was Luke Whitty. He was like 7 feet tall, and he had a duck to get through the door. And here I am, this 9-year-old kid, and I'm just getting into basketball. And because of my association with his son, with Scott, I was able to go to, Fred Taylor was the basketball coach, Coach Jerry Lucas, John Havlicek, some people who played in the NBA and things like that. I got to go to all these basketball camps, and that literally lit the fuse for me of basketball. I couldn't get enough of it. I ate it, I drank it, I slept with a basketball. I mean, it was, when I was in high school, I used to put up Sports Illustrated's on the spare bed, opened up, my hero was Bill Walton, who played for UCLA. And I would open up and I would put all my shoes, my uniform, my gym bag, everything out on these things, thinking that overnight, somehow through osmosis, that his talent was somehow going to make its way into my uniform or my shoes. And I look back now, what a knucklehead I was. But if you think about it, that was really the start of visualization. I was seeing that was going on. So so basketball was it got me, sort of to that first point in my life. And even in college, I got to play against Michael Jordan when his freshman year, 1982, North Carolina won the national championship. And then the following night, I got to play against North Carolina State and Jim Valvano, which the next year, 1983, they won the national championship. Wow. So over the course of a weekend, I got to play against 2 national championship teams. And I'll end it with this story. My brother, who was the pitcher at Notre Dame, was a basketball coach in Chicago and actually coached Michael Jordan's 2 sons in high school. And he said, one day I'm at practice and it's toward the end of practice and I'm teaching the players a drill, and I look up and nobody's paying attention to me at all. So I look where the players were, and it was over at the door to the gym. And Jordan had come into the gym as a dad to pick his kids up and take them home after practice. And my brother looked at him and said, hey, Michael, you're a little bit of a distraction. Would you mind waiting in the hall until practice is over? And Jordan and his wife were incredibly gracious people, very nice, never tried to coach the team or anything like that. And he's like, sure, coach, no problem. I'll wait outside till after practice. And my brother thought later, I'm probably the only coach in the history of basketball that ever kicked Mike Jordan out of practice, so.
That's good, though, that he was so focused on what he was tasked to do. That he turned the biggest celebrity of the the second half of the 20th century away, sports celebrity, I should say. Oh, that's fun. That's really funny. That's funny. Yeah. And how gracious, again, that you might not see that so much anymore. People will be like, do you know who I am?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the families took turns rotating the pregame meal at all the players' houses. And when it was time for the Jordans to do it, everybody got to go over to the Jordan compound, and they had a catered meal in their indoor gymnasium and stuff like that. So it was a pretty amazing experience for my brother.
Oh my God, that was a Disney World night, I bet.
Absolutely.
going to Happy Land for a few hours. That's pretty neat. What a great story. Thank you for sharing that. I love it. Oh my God. So basketball taught you teamwork and cooperation and all those things, I suspect, and that probably lent itself to your crafting the principles that you did in this book, the 10 principles. I suspect that was instrumental.
I think one of the things that team sports taught me was the importance of being part of something that's bigger than yourself, especially today when it seems to be it's all about me. I don't care about you. Give me what I deserve and things like that. And that's been huge, especially through my cancer experience. And I think, if you think about the biggest team game that we all play is this game of life. And I think that's gotten missed a little bit now, that we're all in this together, and that, winning is not an individual thing. I don't care even if you're playing an individual sport, you know, if you're playing tennis or golf, you know, you've got a caddy, you've got, you know, a weight coach, you've got conditioning, you've got a dietitian, nutrition, you've got all these kind of things. So it's just not about you. And a couple of years ago, I read a really interesting book called Legacy, and it's about the New Zealand national rugby team. And I don't know anything about rugby, but from what I understand, this team, by all accounts, is probably the most successful sports franchise in any sport in any country of all times. And one of the things that I found interesting is, as they're looking to bring someone onto their team, whether it's a player or a coach or something like that, you would think obviously they're looking for technical expertise, and they certainly are. But the two things that really stood out to me was the other two things they look at. Number one is character. What kind of person are you? You know, how do you handle loss? Can you learn from it? You know, or you go home and kick the dog kind of thing. And the other thing is humility. And in humility, I think back on my own life, how many job interviews have I gone into where it was like, boy, I better have all the answers to all these questions or I'm not going to get this job. And really what they're saying, and the name of the team is the All Blacks because their uniforms are all black. But what the All Blacks are saying is, humility is part of, you don't have to have all the answers. You individually won't, but us collectively as a team will come together and figure things out.
Yeah, I hear a phrase around some meditation groups that I join online, and it's like one heart, one mind, you know, but there's 20 people there. And so it's just a nice way of affirming that we're getting together for, you know, a common purpose of, for meditation at least, is to chill yourself out a little bit and sort things out and unplug from the racket for a little while.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah. So it's good. It's cohesive. And you know, I think that is layered too. So in this world that we live in, that, and now I'm going to get weird and philosophical, but you know, we have small communities, we have larger communities, we have a global community. It's iterative. It just expands out from a core of perhaps a family, a nuclear family, and or perhaps a neighborhood. And yeah, if you can find that way to cooperate within that family unit, that may give you that ability and that language to find a way to be connected and in a team mindset, I suppose, with others who may not be locally present. I say that aspirationally more than practically, because we do, if we were to look at the news and the media right now, everybody's polarized, everybody's angry, blah, 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 blah. But I think, you know, it comes down to seeing what works within a family. And if the family is dysfunctional, obviously there's no peace. And if the family's functional and you and your extended family are functional, you know, how do you find beyond that what works, like, again, for a team, and looking for team players that, you know, don't go home and punch the dog if something doesn't go right or whatever. So anyway, That's just dropping that in there as maybe a way, you know, if you're.
No, I think you make a good point though. I mean, that is incredibly important. If you're really in it for the team, you know, you have to let some things go. You realize that we're all different, you know, even if it's a husband and wife, I don't care how tight you are, how close you are, you know, you all have your unique gifts and talents. And I remember when I was back playing basketball at the Citadel, I remember we were in the middle of practice, and we were playing like a 3-on-3, and I blocked the shot of one of the younger players, and he got so frustrated he slapped me in the face. Now, it was all I could do to be like, wait a minute, step back for a second here. He did that out of frustration. It wasn't a personal attack on you. And it was like, okay, you're the upperclassman here. Now, you know, yeah, you can go, you know, punch him in the mouth if that's what you want to do, but is that really going to be the best thing for the team? And I remember just having to walk away. You know, I was like, just walk away. It's not worth it. You know, and he came up and apologized afterwards. It was the sort of heat of the moment kind of thing of being able to control yourself, to be able to control your emotions. And believe me, I wanted to hit him right in the chops, but it was like, that wasn't what was really in the best interest of the team.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you took the high road on that, because that is tempting to respond to something like that. And I'm glad, I know you're glad. I know you know that you did the right thing, but I'm glad you did that too. Yeah, right. Especially if he's younger. I hear over and over again in neuroscience that we don't fully form our frontal cortex until we're about 21 to 25. So we'll say that was, yeah, his impulse control was just not quite on board yet. So,
Yeah, and some people a lot later in life, I think. After
yeah, there could be arguments for beyond 25, but yeah, that's the going rate anyway.
Right.
If you're 40 years old and you can't control yourself, then yeah, let's grow that cortex.
Exactly.
Go back to visualizing. You were doing a vision board before all the self-help people got into that.
Exactly.
With your bed, with the, yeah. Right. Good for you. Good for you. So let's take an abrupt segue here and go into health and to your body and some of the, I've listened to your other podcasts, and I think you're inspirational in the sense that what you're confronted with is daunting, and you've risen to the occasion to respond to the situation in a way that walks the walk with what you've talked about in your book and the inspiration that you've had on other people. And so let's go into the biography of the illness, and then I want to check in with you on some ways that life, the perspective that you have and that other people have who are dealing with what could ostensibly be a mortality issue. Let's check into that, but let's go get a little bio on, because I think we need to build up, and then we can talk about that. So
sure. So 2012, I am a girls' high school basketball coach in Texas, and I have this callus break open on the bottom of my left foot, right below my third toe. And initially, I don't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. Mm-hmm. And after a couple of weeks of it not healing, I thought, well, maybe I ought to go see a doctor. So I made an appointment to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, he sent that cyst off to pathology to have it looked at. Mm-hmm. 2 weeks later, I received a call from him. And as I mentioned, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming, until finally he just laid it out for me. And he said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have a rare form of melanoma. And most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to a sun that affects the melanin, the pigment in your skin and things like that. This has nothing to do with that. This is a rare form that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And he said, because your cancer is so incredibly rare, he recommended I go to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston to be treated. And so I did. I had the tumor excised on the bottom of my foot, had all the lymph nodes in my left groin removed. And after I healed, my doctor put me on a weekly injection of a drug called interferon to help keep the disease from coming back. Because 10 years ago, melanoma was pretty much a death sentence. They really didn't have anything to help with that. So the bad side of the interferon was that it gave me severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. And I never missed. That's not true. I missed 1 week when I took my daughter on a college visit, but I was taking this every week. So I had the flu every single week for 5 years. And as my oncologist used to say, this is not a cure, Terry. This is, we're just trying to kick the can down the road to try to buy you more time. 5 years of interferon, I ended up, due to the toxicity of the drug, in the intensive care unit with a fever of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive. Fortunately, I survived that, but I had to stop taking the drug. And almost immediately, the cancer came back in the exact same spot on my foot where it had presented 5 years earlier. That necessitated the following year, 2018, the amputation of my left foot. Cancer worked its way up my shin. 2019, 2 more surgeries. And then in 2020, an undiagnosed tumor kind of at the end of my foot, sort of in my ankle area, grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone. And my only recourse right in the middle of the pandemic was to have my left leg amputated. And talk about a scary, I mean, my wife literally dropped me off at the hospital. I was the only surgery that day. My doctor had to get special permission to perform it. I should have been in the hospital for about a week. My doctor's like, you're in for 48 hours. Have the therapist teach you everything you can, and then you're out. And that was all because of COVID and that. So I also found out at that time I had tumors in my lungs, which I'm still being treated for. I think I alluded to that I had treatment last week, and I'm on a clinical trial drug for those tumors, which right now are stable, which is doctor speak for they're not getting any worse, but they're not getting any better.
They're not going anywhere. Yeah, what a harrowing story too. And how lucky are you to have the rare stuff, right? You know, the non-textbook, like they have to go into the archives to
really
ask around, like, dude, have you ever heard of this one? I remember a lecture about this once back in med school, but gee whiz. Yeah.
Well, I'd say, you know, when your doctor tells you that he's been practicing for 25 years and he's never seen this, you're kind of like, wow, boy, I really made a big problem with this one.
Did they give you a statistic? Are you like one in like 400,000 or a million, or did they even give you that one? Not that you want to know, but
they didn't. I remember seeing somewhere that it is. I mean, there's maybe 3,000 people, and again, I'm kind of just trying to remember the number. Maybe 3,000 people in the U.S. that get that form of melanoma every year. That's how incredibly rare it is.
So like 0.001%.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. That's not the kind of lottery you want to hit, right?
No,
when you're catching odds. So humor aside, and I said to you when we had our pre-meet, I had a very, very minor bout with melanoma, and it hopefully isn't on the radar anymore. And but what's funny though is, having had that, you think about every little cramp, every little pain, every little thing that comes up. You're like, I had some stuff show up in my abdomen about 2 weeks ago, and I went to the doctor and I'm like, dude, I want whatever you got to do, you know, put through another PET scan, whatever you want, you know, I just want to know. I don't care, you know, whatever the answer is, I don't care, but I want to know. So it's not like a mystery thing. So I have a small taste of that. And hopefully that was sufficient for now. I mean, yeah, but so, and I say that to say that you've got to have a certain kind of moxie or a certain kind of starch in you to, get up every day, especially like you were saying with the interferon for several years, to sort of wage this kind of, it's not even a war, it's more of a siege situation, you know, and how to best defend yourself, wall up your city from the siege kind of thing. So that again is another well, I suppose, or fountainhead of inspiration to have done what you did with your book. But let me ask you about your perspective in knowing how tentative life can be and how that shapes you in your day-to-day plan making and things. And I say this for the YouTube audience, and I will make sure I reference this for people who may have just gotten their voodoo diagnosis or may be dealing with a 2 or higher stage cancer, where the percentages start going down as far as walking away. You know, do you want to share some of what you've had a number of years? So can you share how you show resilience to this and stand tall in front of this kind of stuff?
Yeah. I don't have all the answers, and I hate it when I go on podcasts and I tell, you know, and it's like, well, you know, you've been through all this and things are great, and, you know, and it's like, things aren't great. I have bad days. You know, there are days I cry. There are days I feel sorry for myself. There are days when, you know, you just mentioned my 5-year battle with interference. There were days that I prayed to die. I was so sick of being sick that it was just like, okay, God, I'm done. I am totally done with this. I want out, but I didn't get out, and I'm still here. And I like I said, I don't have all the answers, and anybody who tells you they do, I think it is nuts.
Yeah. All
I do is say, look, this is what's worked for me, and maybe it works for you. Maybe it doesn't, but you have to find what works for you. I had a nurse one actually fairly recently asked me, what was it like to have your foot amputated in 2018 and then have your leg amputated? And I told her, I said, it has not been easy. It's been 2 years since my leg amputation. I'm still learning how to walk with a prosthetic. I don't, in all honesty, I don't trust it. You know, when you're a kid learning to walk, you fall over, it's no big deal. When you're 6'8", you fall over, you get hurt. So, you know, falling is not is not something that I, is something that I can do. But what I told her is that cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Justin. That's who everybody who's listening to us is. But we all get caught up in, I'm going to lose my hair, or I'm going to feel like crap because I'm literally, I got diarrhea, or I'm throwing up, or, all the ugly things that we see in life. But that's not who we are. Mm-hmm. And if we spend all this time worrying about losing my hair, I mean, I'm not that good looking to begin with, so losing my hair probably, probably be an improvement for me.
Yeah, right. The Kojak look or the Bruce Willis.
Yeah, exactly.
It worked for them.
Lollipop, who loves you, baby?
Yeah, exactly.
but I think the other thing is that you've got to keep your sense of humor. You've got to be able to laugh at this and laugh at yourself and laugh at your experience. I mentioned I was treated at MD Anderson. And every year I get a letter from the tumor registry at MD Anderson that basically asks me to circle 3 choices on this letter. Do you still have cancer, but you're alive? Are you alive, cancer-free, or are you dead? And so literally, I can't wait to get that letter every year, because it's like, yeah, I still got it, but you know what? I'm still here. Yeah. And I send it back to him. I mean, as soon as I get it, I fill it out and send it back to him and stuff like that. Because it was like, you know what? No, it hasn't beaten me yet. It will. It'll eventually take my life, but not today. And this is all we've got. We've got today. Yeah. And we don't, yesterday, hopefully you can learn from it and be a better version of yourself. And tomorrow, it's not guaranteed. So I don't spend a lot of time about the future. And I tell the people that I care about a lot more than I used to, how much I love them and how much they mean to me.
Excuse me. Choking on my saliva here. In a way, and this might sound morbid to some people, but if you've had memento mori, if you've had the stark reminder of your mortality, like you said a moment ago, you could go through life oblivious and say, well, I'm only 42 or 50 or whatever, I'll live forever, and I'm fine. But then you get whacked in a car accident, you didn't see it coming. But I think people who are given that notice get a renewal on life, and they get a new lease on life to say, if I have 6 months or 3 years or whatever, man, that's going to be some fine living if I look at it from the right perspective, because I understand what the essence of life is about, what the joie de vivre of life is about, and I will fully embrace that for the time that I have. And so the rest of us, and I may be in your category, my melanoma could come back and wipe me out in a year or whatever, and that's fine. But people who live with sort of a relatively healthy, no diagnosis of anything, again, could be subject to a sudden catastrophic event or situation. And they didn't have that foresight, I guess, is maybe where I'm heading. And it's not to judge. It's not that that's bad in any way. It's a wonderful gift to live that way, too, to think that you have an eternity to live and you're going to make it to 90 or whatever. And so I guess either way is good. But I think, you get this sort of enhanced, like from 720p to 4K kind of view on life when you're told you've only got, maybe you got 5 years, and go have some fun and stop worrying about shit, just go.
Exactly. But, and COVID has really kind of impacted me because I have these tumors in my lungs. So I don't spend a lot of time around people. I don't spend a lot of time doing the things that I want. And I've always said there's a big difference between living and not dying. And I felt at least since COVID, that I've been in sort of the not dying category, that, what I'm doing is not really living. Every 3 weeks I go to the hospital for treatment. I get 2 weeks off to recover. I mean, that's not really living, that's just not dying. But you know what? Can I impact the nurses that take care of me? Can I impact my doctor and the therapists and things like that? I do. I always go armed to treatment with a bunch of dad jokes, and now the nurses expect me to have dad jokes and things like
comedian.
that. So, yeah, exactly. Let's laugh a little bit about this because it's so dire that you'll lose your mind if you don't keep your perspective.
It goes back to that radiation of family that I was talking about, or radiation of like kind, and if you can be a positive influence for however much time you're granted, that's so much gold right there, because we know what it's like to be dark as a species, as a collective, as a global society. We know that shadow side, but to have agents and characters like yourself and others that, despite whatever's going on, can keep that that joy and that sense of humor and that spark of aliveness going. I think that's such an inspiration, or perhaps a gift, for everyone else, that that it's a reminder, because all of us get caught up in the petty stuff, and we say, oh, blah, 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 blah. I do it. I kind of digress into things, and so talking with you helps to, it may reset things for a few days for me, and then, but I can come back to it, right, and say, what am I worried about? What the hell's, what's my, what's my problem? Yeah, because, and it's not to say that, Terry's doomed and I should be grateful. No, it's that Terry has this perspective, that despite the fact that there could be something imminent here, and there is something imminent here, that the positive attitude is there, the desire to continue going on. Like you said, you had those times. I had a brain injury years ago, and God, I wanted to die. Because I kept seeing myself in a nursing home at 41 years of age, because I was losing everything. I had no faculties. I wouldn't have this conversation right now with you. I couldn't even recognize your face. I couldn't talk, no memory. And what a prison cell to be trapped in. I'd much rather have a physical illness than a neurological thing that I went through. But I came out of that born again, just completely respecting what I now have, what I've gotten. It took me years to get things back, but to have that again, and to be able to appreciate things and see them from a different angle. And again, I'm on a tangent, but I'm sort of commiserating to a degree what you're doing with your book, and the inspiration that you bring to people. And I think it's beyond just nurses. I mean, you've done a number of podcasts, and I think that's good to get that message out here, because I think if somebody shows up to watch any of these conversations with you, that, again, if they just got a diagnosis, if they just found something out that's not good, I think that's comforting to have commiseration and connection with somebody.
It is. And I guess, let me, take that a step further. If there's somebody out there that's listening to us that you think something might be wrong, please don't wait. Please don't wait, because it really is true with cancer. If you catch it early, so many cancers can be cured, or at least gotten to the point where you can live with them. And I look back on my dad. My dad was from the generation where men didn't go to doctors. And, back in the 1980s, my dad had end-stage breast cancer, which for a man, they were like, oh, we have no idea what to do with this. And it was, we'll throw stuff against the wall and see if it sticks. And, I just looked at that and I thought, gosh, if you would have gone to the doctor when you knew you were ill, there's a very good chance you would have seen me get married. There was a good chance you would have seen your granddaughter. There was and all the things that he missed. Now, that was his journey to hoe, and he had to do that. But I still look back on it like, you know what? I know you're scared. I know, but not knowing sometimes is worse. As you said, I've got something here. I've got something in my abdomen. You know what? I want to know. I want to know, because I want to make the decision on how we, my medical team, are going to attack this.
Yeah. I'm going in for a colonoscopy in about 10 days or so, and that's going to reveal. They don't know what the hell's crampy in my stomach, and so I want to make sure I know. Again, given my history, probably nothing, because I have some autoimmune conditions too, and so could just be autoimmune stuff going on. But like you said, find out, man. Go, if I could go get a CT scan right now with with contrast, I would, just to see if anything lights up, or a PET scan, just to see what lights up, because I'd rather know now, and if it's low stages, go get it knocked out, and
exactly,
and get on the therapy. Yeah. So yeah, I agree. I'll echo that 100% and support what you said, because you don't mess around with it.
No.
You don't mess around with it at all. But like I said, we need folks like yourself who are looking at it from what I would consider to be a stoic and healthy perspective, that you can be pragmatic about things, but nonetheless you embrace what is the reality for yourself and for millions of other people, not just with cancer, but with we see such a rise in multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's, all the autoimmune diseases, that rob us of our mobility and our ability to function. And there is a case and I'll lead up to something here. The first person that I interviewed when I started this series, had ALS,
Mhm.
and she was at close to end stage. She took herself out about a year ago in October of last year, and I don't blame her. She just took this liquid and that was it, because she was locked in at that point. And but you said earlier, you've got your mind, and when I interviewed her, her mind was sharp. And when I knew her, I met her in person, and just a brilliant person. And she was a therapist, and so she was there to help people and be there for folks. And she had a beautiful, loving community around her, big extended family that came to her to support her in her transition. And that's been very inspiring. In fact, she wrote a book, and it's part of the interview that I did with her, to again help people if you've gotten something like that, to know that you're not alone. There's almost 8 billion of us, and there's so much variety of what we're going through. And I think suffering's baked into life. We generate a lot of suffering, but suffering's there. You're an example of that. And so are people who are affected by tsunamis or earthquakes and things like that. It's just the way the universe unfolds. And, that you can't do much about, but you can do something about the suffering that is secondary to whatever. So in other words, you could have spiraled into depression and taken to a bottle and said, screw it, I'm done. I hate this stuff. Yeah, you could have taken other routes. And some folks will do that. And maybe that's a coping mechanism. But I think the thriving aspect of it, and just standing tall and being resilient and showing what you can do with your life, even if somebody says you got a few months or a couple years left. I think it's really admirable.
And I think disease does that, regardless of what it tends to isolate you. It isolates you from your friends, and then from your family, and then in a lot of ways from yourself. And it's important to kind of stand up to it. As you said, I don't have all the answers, but you know what? I'm here today, and I'm going to stand up to this disease. No guarantee about what's going to happen tomorrow. So don't get to the point where, and people do that. They medicate themselves and they take themselves out of that. You know what? I want to go down fighting. And I remember I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that went, when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to put it. Absolutely. There's a line from a song that I like, and on the surface, it sounds a little, but it's there's nothing more dangerous than a man with nothing to lose, nothing to live for, and nothing to prove. But by dangerous, you could be dangerous in a great way, right? You could just be throwing convention out the window and saying, I'm not a victim. I'm not a tragedy. I am just like you. I'm a living human being. You could get hit by a dump truck tomorrow, and it would be just as tragic if I pass away from my terminal illness in 4 or 5 months or a year or whatever. And so again, be dangerous, and not dangerous in an antisocial kind of way. Just live for that danger of enjoying your life.
Everybody dies, but not everybody really lives. And I think that's kind of what you're saying. We're all going to die. Hey, I want to go out having a great time doing it.
And if you got nothing to lose, nothing to prove, nothing to live for. Now, I don't want to say nothing to live for in a negative way, but it's like you don't care. And that's what a liberating, what a weight off. I just fixed my shirt. So what a weight off your shoulders, right? To know that you're untethered in that sense. And it's like, wow, what have I got to lose? Right. Go do what you feel like you need to do. And as you've done, you wrote a book, and you've inspired people to keep their house clean, this house clean, their soul, their mind clean, but not in a moralistic way, more in a functionality way. That's the sustainability there, is to just find your path, know how you're impacting others, how you're impacting yourself, and I think your book is a good teaching tool, or a good, like I said earlier, I think in the beginning of the conversation, if God knows my parents did the best they could, but they were deeply dysfunctional. And so I don't think I ever had any of these. My father and I have had talks, but to have this book is kind of like that. It's like the invisible father that says, this is what I understand things to be, and this is how I'm going to pass something on to you, So I say to the YouTube audience, if you didn't have the greatest father in the world, which is perfectly fine. I love my father. He did the best he could, and I'd still love and respect him to this day. He's going to be 80 in a few months, and I think the world of him, because he went through a lot, and anyway, to have a book like this is to have that sort of second parent, or third parent that can teach you or keep you focused on things that I think are meaningful. And meaning making is very, very important in life, I think. So.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I believe it. After having read your book, I thought, this is a good takeaway. This is a good, again, it's like a reference book. Yeah, it's like a guidebook for lifing, for humaning, and all that kind of stuff. So, now, would you do a part 2, or is this good? This is it. This is.
No, I'd be happy to do a part 2 with you.
Have you thought about like sitting down at the old typewriter and not that we use typewriters anymore, but just you and I are old enough. We know what
yeah, you're right.
Days in school, the lazy fox jumped over the whatever that was we used to do, and typing.
My roommate in college was an English major, and he was notorious for
my gosh.
Friday night, pulling an all-nighter on Thursday, to turn in his paper. So I slept a lot of times with the headphones on, so that he could hunt and peck away at his paper.
Bless your heart. That must have been something. Oh my goodness. But yeah, I mean, what would you want to craft if you were to turn out another book? Not to put you on the spot. I mean, you don't.
No. I've thought about it. I think Sustainable Excellence is a book about success and how people can be successful in life, however they determine that for themselves. And I think what I'd like to do is write another book that's about another word that begins with S, and that's significance. Success is what we do for ourselves. We are successful at whatever it is you want to say. Significance is what we do for other people. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I think you can be successful and significant at the same time, but I'm still trying to figure out how that would look and how I would figure that out. But it is definitely something that is sort of, I'm not going to say it's in the back of my mind. I think it's kind of working its way forward, but a book more about significance, about making a difference in people's lives, a positive difference in people's life, which we all can do. I don't care how bad your situation is. You can always make a positive difference in somebody's life. Even if it's just a smile or hey, how's it going today? Or do you want to have a cup of coffee? We can make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you don't have to be a Gandhi or a Mother Teresa in this world. That's what I was saying earlier. It's like the everyday person like yourself who just takes some time to pass some ideas along. So yeah, that's a good continuation and a worthy one, I think. And it would be great if others are inspired by you to do their own little story. I don't think you can hire people to help you write. So if you've got a good idea, or you can get coaching for writing and things like that. So I would say to people, just if you got something you think is, check in with your friends first. Ask your mom, if a close relative is going to tell it to you straight if it's not a good idea. But I think if you do have something to share, it's worthy, especially if, again, and I don't want to upplay this whole thing about us, living in a hectic, crazy age. But, if there are people who are lost right now, who are looking for meaning and they're looking for purpose in their lives. And I think when they can latch onto something that grounds them a little bit, like sustainable excellence and any other forthcoming issues from you, I think that's a good way to help your fellow man, and they will cry for you when you're gone.
Yeah, I remember reading an article that said that 84% of the people, this was a survey that felt that they had a book in them in some way, whether it was a memoir or a fiction book. But less than 1% of those people will ever write that book, which I thought was such a shame, because we all have, I'm just a guy. I mean, I'm not important. I'm not famous. I never will be. Nobody's going to name a street or a basketball court or anything else after me, and that's okay. But I think I can still have some positive impact on the people whose lives I touch. We can all do that. So don't think no matter where you are in your life, you can always have a difference. Don't think that, hey, who cares? Somebody cares. Like you say, somebody out there will be like, you know what? That story resonates with me.
Yeah. And even if you write it for yourself and you just shelf it, that you feel that satisfaction that you got it out of your system. But go beyond that and have honest people give you feedback with it and read the manuscript and say, yeah, this is something that could change people around. And I'm going to issue a challenge to the world right now. I think there needs to be a Terry Tucker basketball hoop somewhere in this world. Might not be a gymnasium. That would be good. but let's get at least a Terry Tucker basketball hoop sometime down the road. Yeah.
There you go.
A little
There you
plaque
go.
right on the hoop there on the
Right.
bar. You know? I think you deserve
Tucker,
it.
who is this guy? I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's play.
Yeah, never heard of him. Never heard of him. No. And they, they could have a reference sustainably excellent, or something
There
like
you
that.
go.
And with what is the QR codes now they've got, right? So you can everybody's wired now. I forget about this. Everybody's got their phone. Boop, you can do that.
I'm old school. So.
Yeah, I am too. I'm at that. I'm the crossroads. Like I'm 53, and so it's all, I embrace it and I use it, but I didn't grow up with it. I was like, no, not part of my normal like extension of who I am kind of thing.
No, I remember rotary phones and no cable. So that's
yeah. When I was 13, my mother moved me from Washington, D.C. to rural Virginia. And so there wasn't any cable at that time. This was 83. Okay. And I was just getting into high school. And we got out there and there was one UHF channel from Harrisonburg, Virginia, and that was it. So I went from having all the DC stations to just this one PBS thing, and it was all British comedies and Masterpiece Theater and all that kind of stuff. So it really pushed me to like really want to watch television.
Right.
I grew to love all the Britcoms. They were great. They really warped my mind.
Sure.
It was good because then I would just go outside. I wouldn't, I had so much nature around me and stuff like that. So I didn't miss the TV. And in fact, I don't have TV anymore now. I have YouTube and that's about it. So I'm grateful for that. I'd hate to be down some rabbit hole of what are they, reality TV and miniseries and all that. Yeah. There's so much more to life than that.
There is. And that's just it. Get out there and live it. Stop living vicariously through, some knucklehead on television that it's like, that's not real life. Go find your real life.
Yeah. It's like culture, and I hate to use this word, it's like cultural pornography. It's just some vacuous nonsense. It's just not going to do you any good. Most people who watch my channel already know that, so we're not preaching to anybody out there. But yeah, we'll just say that for the record, that it's just forget about it. So Terry, I think we had a good conversation, man. I think we're at like an hour and 20 minutes or so right now. So if you're feeling good, maybe we can let this one just sort of gel up and get out in the world and have some impacts on people's lives. If that sounds good to you, I will ask you if you want to do a closing thought or anything like that, something you want to address directly to the YouTubers, to the audience. You're welcome.
I always like, if I can, to end it with this story. And you mentioned, you've probably heard this, so I'll apologize. I try to use it as much as I can. I've always been a big fan of Westerns growing up. When I was young, my mom and dad used to let me stay up and watch, Bonanza and Gunsmoke. My favorite was Wild Wild West. 1993, the movie Tombstone came out. You may have seen it. Still big blockbuster. It's still being shown in reruns. It starred Val Kilmer as a man by the name of John Doc Holliday and Kurt Russell as a man by the name of Wyatt Earp. Now, Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp were two living, breathing human beings who walked on the face of the earth. They're not made-up characters for the movie. Now, Doc was called Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but pretty much Doc Holliday was a gunslinger and a card shark. And Wyatt Earp, most of his adult life, had been some form of a lawman. And somehow these two men from entirely divergent, different backgrounds come together and form this very close friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc Holliday is dying at a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about 3 hours from where I live. The real Doc Holliday died at that sanitarium, and he's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. And Wyatt, at this point in his life, is destitute. He has no money, he has no job, he has no prospects for a job. So every day he comes to play cards with Doc, and the two men pass the time that way. And in this almost ending scene of the movie, the two men are talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, when I was younger, I was in love with my cousin, but she joined a convent over the affair, but she's all that I ever wanted. And then he looks at Wyatt and he says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? And Wyatt kind of nonchalantly says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal. There's just life, and get on with living yours. Justin, you and I probably know people out there. There's probably people listening to it that are sort of sitting back and saying, well, when this happens, I'll have a normal life. Or when that occurs, I'll have a successful life. Or when this arises, I'll have a significant life. What I'd like to leave your audience with is this. Don't wait. Don't wait for life to come to you. Get out there, find the reason you were put on the face of this earth. use your unique gifts and talents and live that reason. Because if you do, at the end of your life, I'm going to promise you two things. Number one, you're going to be a whole lot happier. And number two, you're going to have a whole lot more peace in your heart.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I call that the if-then algorithm, right? So, you know, if-then, and it's a fallacy, you know, because there may never be the then, you know, that dump truck might just be around the corner. So, yeah, or the diagnosis that you get, you know, X amount of weeks or months to as my friend used to say, go pick out your coffin.
Yeah,
he had a more morbid sense of humor than I did. We would talk about, we were both into horticulture and botany, and so there were certain poisonous plants and certain seeds with certain proteins that would just kill you painfully and slowly. And he's like, if you accidentally ingest this, it's like you have just enough time to go pick out your coffin. I thought, well, that's like the two-stepper snakes. Like, yeah, you'll get 2 steps after this snake bites you. And so,
exactly.
Yeah, think about what you want to, you know, rest on with your final thoughts with that.
Exactly.
And as an aside to that really excellent story that you just told, I was watching the $64,000 question, a segment of that show from 1958, and Virgil Earp was on the show. And I believe he was a nephew to Wyatt Earp or a cousin or something like that.
I think it was his brother.
Was it his brother? Okay. Yeah. Born in 1889, and he had a fascinating, and he did really well. He had done the 16,000 the week before. He was at 32,000 in this little segment on YouTube. But it was neat to listen to him because, again, born in 1889, this was a year before he died in 1959. And he was talking about, like, the host of the show said, well, you know, Mr. Earp, he goes, well, how hard was it being a lawman probably in the, you know, late 1800s, early 1900s? Yeah. And he says, well, I'm going to tell you right now, people were a lot more honest back then. You could put a bar of gold in your cabin and you could walk away for a day with the door unlocked and nobody would take your bar of gold and this kind of thing. And he was sort of making that as a social commentary about 1958 and all the societal morass that we're in 1958. I thought, oh, brother, I'm glad you're not with us now, because poor Virgil, he just would have what? If we tried to talk about future shock. Anyway, but it is fascinating to see that link with history. You know, these people who were born in the 19th century and telling their stories. So I thought when you mentioned Wyatt Earp, I thought that was a nice little tie-in. But Terry, I want to thank you so much for being a guest of mine and being a good conversation partner and sharing this dialogue together. It was a pleasure, and it's informative and inspirational at the same time. So I appreciate that. And to the YouTube audience, those of you who are still with us, and I always joke about this at the end of every one of my interviews, we capture about 8 to 10%. So if this gets 300 views, and you know,
sure,
28 to 30 viewers, which is really good. You know, if we can have 28 people walk away and go, oh, it's a good conversation. So I want to acknowledge you guys and say thank you to everyone who sticks around to the end. I always appreciate. I guess I call it support. I don't derive any revenue from this channel, so it's just a hobby of mine. But I appreciate you listening to folks like Terry and listening to their stories and walking away and maybe sharing those stories with other people. So, and all, again, relevant links to Terry's work will be down in the description field for you guys. But I want to acknowledge you and share my gratitude with you for being here. Terry, you and I will say goodbye after I'm done with record. But again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your company and your story, sharing your story with us. And I hope this video gets out in the world and develops a good, long, healthy life on its own.
Well, thanks for having me on, Justin. I really appreciate it. And it's just been a blast talking with you.
Good. Likewise. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So, but like I said, I'll say goodbye to you after we're done with record. YouTube audience, thank you guys so very much. As always, appreciate your being with us. Thanks.